I used to believe that being the responsible one in the family was a compliment, that it meant I was dependable, mature, trustworthy. What I didn't understand until much later was that it actually meant expendable, that I was the one who could be counted on to sacrifice, again and again, without question. My name is Aubrey Fields. I'm 33, and until last year, I thought I had finally broken free of my family's quiet control. I lived alone in Austin, Texas, had a stable career in UX design, a grumpy cat named Juniper, and a circle of friends who didn't see me as a walking emergency response unit. I visited my parents on holidays, smiled through their subtle jabs about still being single, and left before the guilt trip stuck too deep. But then, my younger sister Savannah got pregnant. The father vanished. And my mom called me in a trembling voice, saying, "Just come home for a few weeks, sweetheart. Your sister needs you." What I didn't realize was that a few weeks was never the plan. The nursery had already been set up in my childhood bedroom. My name was on the schedule for diaper duty. My parents had begun telling neighbors I was moving back for good. I hadn't agreed to any of this. What started as a temporary visit became a slow suffocation. Every time I tried to leave, there was a new emotional crisis. Every time I set a boundary, I was called selfish. Until one day I looked around and realized I was no longer a daughter. I was a solution, a tool. So I disappeared. And if you think that was the end of the story, trust me, it wasn't. Growing up, I learned that being good meant being useful. My parents, Judy and Mark Fields, never outright said it. Of course, they used words like reliable, mature, and thoughtful. But what they really meant was Aubrey handles things. Aubrey doesn't complain. Aubrey picks up the slack when others can't or won't. And others, in this case, almost always meant my younger sister, Savannah. Savannah was born when I was 6. She was loud and fearless and wild in a way I never dared to be. When she threw tantrums, broke things, or refused to do chores, our parents would sigh and say, "She's just spirited." When I forgot to take the trash out once because I was up late finishing a science project, I got grounded for being disrespectful. I was the steady one, the helper, the built-in babysitter by the time I was 10. I changed Savannah's diapers, packed her school lunches, and proofread her English essays in high school while balancing my own AP workload. If she missed curfew, she got a stern look and a warm breakfast the next morning. If I came home 5 minutes late, my dad would be waiting on the porch with a watch in his hand. My mom always said, "You're just more mature. Aubrey, you've always been the responsible one." As if that excused the unequal expectations. As if that wasn't something they'd taught me by handing me more responsibility than a child should carry. By the time I was 14, I was doing our weekly grocery shopping with a calculator and a list, while Savannah was allowed to express herself by skipping chores and dyeing her hair purple. I remember once asking why Savannah never had to help with Sunday dinner. My mom smiled and said, "Because you're better at it. Honey, you make the best mashed potatoes," and that was that. No matter how tired I was, the responsibility was mine. Looking back now, I realize how deeply those roles were ingrained. I thought being the helper was my identity. I wore it like armor. If I was useful, maybe I was worthy. If I carried the weight, maybe I wouldn't be overlooked. That logic made sense when I was a kid trying to make sense of inequality. It would take me years to see it for what it truly was: conditioning. I got my first part-time job at 16, saving for college while Savannah spent her weekends at dance competitions funded, of course, by our parents. They cheered her on at every recital, no matter how many she flaked out of. When I won a state writing contest, I got a muted, "That's nice, dear," before they changed the subject to her latest duet performance. Savannah was the golden girl, impulsive, charming, and chronically unreliable. I was the shadow behind her, making sure the lights stayed on and the bills got paid. College became my exit plan. I applied to schools in other states, praying for distance. When I got into the University of Washington with a partial scholarship, I accepted it without even telling my parents I'd applied there. They were furious when they found out, mostly because it meant I wouldn't be available to come home on weekends. Why so far, my mom had asked, hurt flickering behind her eyes. There are great schools right here in Texas. I need to figure things out on my own, I'd said carefully. You just don't want to be part of this family anymore, she muttered. I packed anyway. College was the first place where no one expected me to save the day. I was allowed to just be. I made friends who liked me for my humor, not my helpfulness. I discovered a love for design, drawn to the challenge of making something functional and beautiful. I took long walks in the rain, learned how to cook meals for one, and adopted a stray cat I named Juniper. I was alone, but not lonely. For the first time, I wasn't a reflection of anyone else. I was just Aubrey. After graduation, I moved to Austin and started working as a UX designer for a small but respected tech company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I rented a one-bedroom apartment, decorated it in warm earth tones, and developed a morning ritual coffee with oat milk, a 10-minute journal session, and petting Juniper as she purred on my lap. My parents would still call occasionally, usually when Savannah needed something money. Advice, moral support. I offered what I could, on my terms. I visited for holidays, but always made sure to have a return flight booked. I kept things polite, professional, safe, until the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday in late September. I had just finished a long client meeting and was unwinding with a glass of wine when my phone buzzed. Mom. I hesitated. Our last conversation hadn't ended well. She'd made a snide comment about how I spent Christmas alone last year, as if choosing friends over family were a betrayal. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but a small part of me, still craving approval, still programmed to care, pressed accept. Aubrey. Sweetie, she began, her voice thick with emotion. We really need you to come home. My stomach dropped. That tone, the mix of urgency and guilt, I knew it too well. What's wrong? I asked, already bracing myself. It's Savannah. She said she's pregnant. I blinked. Okay. And she's 4 months along, Mom continued. The father he left just walked out. She's devastated. We're trying to support her, but it's hard. I've had to take time off work. Your father's back isn't what it used to be. Her voice cracked. We just can't do this alone. I stayed silent, processing. Can you come down this weekend, she pleaded. Just for a little while, a few weeks, until the baby comes. A familiar hook caught in my chest. I should have said no. Instead, I heard myself say, I'll think about it. I already knew I'd say yes. Not because I wanted to, but because I'd been taught, from the time I could hold a broom or make a grocery list. That helping was what made me good. It wasn't until much later that I realized they were never asking. They were assigning. And I was already being set up to play a role I never agreed to. Before I dive into what happened when I went back, you need to understand the life I built, the one I was proud of, the one they wanted me to throw away like it was nothing. Austin wasn't just a city I moved to after college. It was the first place I ever truly belonged. The warmth of the people, the smell of brisket drifting from food trucks on Congress Avenue, the live music humming through weekend nights, it fit me. Not because it was perfect, but because I chose it. I'd lived there for nearly 9 years by the time my mom made that call about Savannah. In those years, I'd gone from junior designer at a scrappy tech startup to UX lead for a respected agency with clients all over the country. My work was niche but impactful, making platforms more accessible, more intuitive. It required empathy, patience, and attention to detail. Funny how the skills I developed cleaning up after my sister's messes turned out to be marketable. My apartment was on the third floor of a quiet building tucked behind a row of coffee shops and vintage bookstores. It wasn't luxurious, but it was cozy. The hardwood floors had character. The balcony overlooked a patch of trees that turned gold in the fall. And every inch of that space reflected me from the watercolor art I'd painted and hung above the couch. To the cat shelves I installed so Juniper could perch like royalty near the windows. I had my routines. Morning walks with an oat milk latte. Thursday night yoga at the rec center. Sunday dinners with my friend group Annika, Raj, Chloe, people who knew me as Aubrey, not Savannah's sister. They never guilted me for setting boundaries. They didn't raise eyebrows if I said no. They respected when I said I was tired, or needed time to myself, or had to focus on work. I didn't have to earn my space in that circle by proving my usefulness. That life, as modest as it might have seemed to my family, was hard won. Every square foot of that apartment, every step forward in my career, every piece of independence I fought for it. Quietly, consistently, and without asking anyone for permission. So when my mom said, "Just come home for a few weeks," I told myself it was temporary. A short disruption. I cleared my calendar, took personal leave, packed a small suitcase, and left detailed instructions for Chloe, who agreed to cat sit while I was gone. "Don't let them guilt you into staying longer than you want," she warned as I handed her the spare key. "I won't," I said, trying to sound confident. She raised an eyebrow. "Promise?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Promise." But even as I drove east toward my hometown of Lakemont, something gnawed at me. My gut whispered that I wasn't being told the full story. The 5-hour drive gave me time to rehearse my boundaries like mantras. I'm here to help, not to stay. I will not make promises I can't keep. I'm not responsible for Savannah's choices. Over and over again. I repeated them. But I also packed my laptop. Just in case I needed to log in to work, I notified my boss that I'd be checking emails periodically. I even rescheduled a few client meetings just temporarily. The moment I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, I saw the first red flag. The house looked different. Not just fresh paint or new shutters, but manicured, performative, as if they'd staged it. My mom rushed out the front door like I was a long-lost soldier returning from war. "Aubrey, honey, you're here." She enveloped me in a hug before I'd even gotten out of the car. My dad followed close behind, giving me a stiff, pat-on-the-back kind of greeting. His way of showing emotion. Inside, everything looked unnervingly pristine. The family photos were rearranged, and a new scent filled the air, lavender baby powder. Then I saw the nursery. It wasn't a spare room. It was my room. The posters I once hung were gone. The window seat I loved had been covered with a padded cushion shaped like a cloud. The walls were painted a soft sage green with stenciled vines trailing along the top border. In place of my old desk was a changing table. Where my bed used to be stood a white crib, complete with monogrammed sheets that read, "Baby S." My stomach twisted. "You like it?" Mom beamed behind me. "You converted my room?" "Well," she said, brushing invisible dust from the windowsill, "it's not like you were using it. That's not the point." She blinked innocently. "We just figured it made the most sense. Savannah's room is right across the hall. It'll be easier for feedings." I turned to her. "So, where am I staying the guest den?" she said brightly. "We set up the pull-out couch. It's cozy. And you'll be close to the kitchen, the den, no door, no privacy, and definitely not intended for long-term stays." I thought I was here for a few days. "Well," Mom said, tilting her head, "we figured once you saw everything, you might consider staying a bit longer. It just makes sense." I stood there, numb. The words "make sense" rang in my ears like a bell. They always used that phrase to justify something they'd already decided. It made sense for me to do more chores. It made sense for me to skip prom to babysit Savannah. It made sense for me to put family before everything. And every time I pushed back, I was met with disappointment. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I went through the motions hugging Savannah, who barely looked up from her phone, nodding through dinner, smiling while they bragged about how ready the house was for the baby. But the tension in my jaw never relaxed. That night, I lay on the pull-out couch staring at the ceiling, Juniper's absence a cold weight on my chest. I missed the soft click of her paws on the hardwood, the way she curled against my hip as I drifted to sleep. I missed my apartment, my space, my life, and I hadn't even been gone 12 hours. I thought I'd set boundaries. I thought I was strong enough to hold them. But I had no idea what I was truly up against. The next morning started at 6:15 a.m., not with an alarm, but with my mother's voice outside the den. "Aubrey, honey," she called softly, as if whispering made it less of an intrusion. "Savannah's back is really sore this morning. Could you help her get settled before breakfast?" I blinked up at the ceiling in the dim, curtainless room, my neck stiff from the lumpy pull-out couch. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. And then I did. All of it. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on a sweatshirt, and opened the door to find Savannah waiting with a dramatic hand on her stomach. "God, I didn't sleep at all," she said, brushing past me. "Do you mind making that mint tea I like? Mom's out of the good kind." The mint tea she liked was a brand I used to keep in my own kitchen. I made it. Because what else could I do? I told myself it was nothing, just helping out. But that was how it started. Small things, harmless favors. Within 48 hours, my day was no longer mine. I was waking up early to rub Savannah's feet while she watched TV from the couch. I was running quick errands that took hours, returning diapers for a different brand, picking up prenatal vitamins, assembling the rocking chair from the flat-packed box. "I just don't get instructions," Savannah giggled, while scrolling on her phone. Every time I tried to work, someone interrupted me. "Can you help me with this registry site? Can you go to the pharmacy? My legs are swollen. Mom needs help planning the baby shower. And you're so good at organizing things." I was drowning in 1,000 paper cuts. When I brought up work, my dad waved a hand dismissively. "You're still on leave, right? You've got time." I didn't come here to stay. I reminded them. I took a few personal days, but I'm still employed full-time. I have to be back in Austin by— "Oh, sweetheart," my mom interrupted. "You're not thinking clearly. You always said family comes first." I hadn't said that in a decade. They brought out old stories as evidence, holding my teenage good deeds hostage. You were the one who helped when Grandma broke her hip. You stayed home that summer Savannah had mono. But I'd been a child. I hadn't known I could say no. I knew now. And yet why was saying it still so hard by the end of the week? I was exhausted, not from the chores, but from the psychological tug-of-war. They smiled sweetly while reinforcing the cage. Every offer of help turned into an expectation. Every thank you became "you always come through." And then came the first real warning sign, a voicemail from my apartment's leasing office in Austin. "Hi, Aubrey. This is Beth from Ridgeview Flats. Just confirming your request not to renew your lease next month. We received a call from a woman who said she was your mother, and she had your authorization." I froze. I had made no such request. I called back immediately. Heart pounding. "That's a mistake," I said. "Do not cancel anything. I never gave authorization for that." "Oh, good to know," Beth replied, her voice confused. "She said you'd be moving back home permanently." My mouth went dry. The moment I hung up, I confronted my mother. She looked up from the couch where she was folding baby onesies, calm as ever. "I was just helping," she said. "You've been so overwhelmed. I figured I'd take care of the logistics." "You said yourself Austin was expensive." "I never said I was moving back." I snapped. "You didn't have to," she replied, tilting her head. "It's obvious what's best for everyone." best for everyone, but not for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the den with my laptop open, staring at job boards. Not because I needed a job, I had one, but because I was beginning to realize I might need an escape plan. I wasn't just being guilt-tripped, I was being replaced in my own life. The next morning, I tested a boundary. I've got a few work calls today. I said over breakfast, "Please don't interrupt unless it's urgent." Savannah rolled her eyes. "You're literally just on Zoom, not brain surgery." Dad nodded. "You can multitask. Women are great at that." My mother stayed quiet but gave me the disappointed look, the one that always meant, "You've failed us." Later that day, I closed my laptop and found a passive-aggressive note from Savannah on the fridge. "Next time you're done saving the world, the dishwasher needs unloading. Thanks." And that was when the pieces started clicking together. I wasn't a guest in this house. I was being reprogrammed. My mother had started telling people, neighbors, church friends, that I was moving home for good, that I was taking time to reset and helping out until Savannah got back on her feet. As if I was a dropout, a failure, a boomerang kid with nowhere else to go. I wasn't, but they were trying to make me into one. Every time I opened my mouth to protest, I saw Savannah's hand on her belly, the silent weapon. Every emotional landmine began with her sigh or her tears, and my parents would close ranks around her like she was royalty. And I was the ungrateful court jester who dared to challenge her throne. I thought of Juniper, of Chloe, of my plants drying up on the windowsill of my Austin apartment, and I realized something terrifying. I was beginning to forget who I'd been before I came home. On Friday, during a family dinner, my dad made a toast. "To Aubrey," he said, raising a glass of sparkling cider, "for being the rock of this family, always dependable, always stepping up. We're lucky to have you back where you belong." Everyone clapped. Savannah smiled like a satisfied queen. I smiled, too. But inside, something cracked open, because I understood, in that moment, that they didn't see me as a person anymore. They saw me as a function. And if I didn't leave soon, I'd become exactly what they wanted, a live-in, unpaid, forgotten version of myself. By the time I woke up the next morning, I'd made a decision. I was going to leave, not in a dramatic, slamming the door kind of way. No speeches, no pleas for understanding. I knew now that logic and conversation didn't work with people who saw you as a resource, not a human being. I would go quietly, and I wouldn't come back. But before I could act, they escalated. It started with a family meeting. My mom called it over brunch, like it was a casual scheduling update. "We just want to talk through the plan going forward," she said, setting down her mimosa with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The plan for what?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "For the next few months," Dad chimed in. "It's important we're all aligned." I glanced toward Savannah, who sat propped on the couch, rubbing her belly dramatically. She didn't even look at me. My mom took the lead. "Savannah will be entering her 3rd trimester soon. We've been reading that it's helpful to have a live-in caregiver for both the final weeks and especially after the baby arrives. It just makes things smoother." There it was again. "It just makes sense. And we've all seen how naturally you've stepped into that role," Dad added, smiling like he was complimenting me. "I haven't stepped into anything," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. My mom blinked, surprised. "Honey, you've been wonderful, helping with errands, supporting your sister emotionally. We've told everyone how lucky we are that you're back. You've told everyone." I echoed. She nodded. "The whole community has been so supportive. Pastor Greg even said he might mention your sacrifice in the next sermon." I nearly choked. "Sacrifice?" Savannah finally looked up. "Yeah, like giving up your city life to be here for your family. I mean, I could never..." My knuckles whitened around my coffee cup. I didn't give anything up. I said, my voice quiet. I was manipulated. And you're not describing help, you're describing entrapment. Dad frowned. Don't be dramatic. I'm being accurate. I snapped, standing up. You've taken over my space? Told people I'm quitting my job? You've made decisions about my life without even talking to me. Mom's face dropped. But not from guilt, more like disappointment. We just assumed you'd do the right thing. Savannah scoffed. Wow, you're really going to make this about you? My laugh was short and humorless. It is about me. My life, my job, my autonomy. You don't even have kids, she said. Like that invalidated everything. You have nothing tying you down. What's the big deal? That was the moment it hit me in their eyes. My freedom was proof that I could be used, because I had no husband or child. No obligation greater than them. They assumed that meant I belonged to them by default. After that conversation, I stopped pretending. I didn't smile at the dinner table. I didn't offer to help with the baby shower plans. I excused myself from group activities and retreated into the den. The tension in the house was palpable, but no one confronted me yet. Then came the final blow. A few days later, I came back from a walk and found my mother in my makeshift room rifling through my bag. She jumped when I entered. I was just looking for stamps, she said, too quickly. Thought you might have some. I looked down and saw my passport, my financial documents, and a folded copy of my lease agreement sitting in a messy pile on the pull-out couch. Looking for stamps, I said, voice cold. Her face didn't flinch. You were tracking my exit routes, I whispered. You were trying to see what I might be planning. She didn't deny it, and that told me everything. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark and thought. I thought about how easily I'd been reeled back in, how my love for family had been turned into a trap, how my silence had been mistaken for compliance. They didn't just expect me to stay, they were making arrangements to ensure I couldn't leave. Emotionally, socially, and now, financially, I was done. The baby shower was scheduled for Saturday. Dozens of family friends and neighbors filled the living room. Pink streamers everywhere. A massive cake that read, "Welcome." Baby Grace in cursive frosting. I stood by the punch bowl, pretending I was still part of the narrative. Savannah, of course, was the star. She opened gifts and posed for selfies while I served drinks, collected wrapping paper, and kept a list for thank you cards. I kept my head down, until Aunt Carol, ever the conversational grenade, turned to me and said loudly, "So, Aubrey, when do you officially move in?" Everyone turned. I froze. Before I could speak, Mom stepped forward, beaming. She's already here. Aubrey's decided to stay and help full-time with the baby. She's being so selfless. People clapped, as if I'd just announced I was donating a kidney, not being coerced into unpaid labor. Someone even asked me to make a little speech. My mind went blank. My heart pounded in my ears. I forced a smile and mumbled something vague about supporting family, then slipped away under the guise of needing to check the oven. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself in the mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. I looked polite, useful, broken. That was the moment I knew if I didn't get out now, I never would, back in the den. I opened my laptop and typed one sentence into a blank document: I am leaving. Then I started the checklist. I would need to transfer my savings, secure my job, find a safe destination. I had done hard things before, but this was me choosing myself, fully and without apology for the first time in my life. I didn't eat dinner that night. I said I had a migraine. It wasn't a lie. What I had was a clarity-induced pounding in my head that made it impossible to speak or smile without wanting to scream. So I stayed in the den, lights off, and plotted. They had no idea I was already gone mentally, emotionally, spiritually. Now, I just needed to leave physically. First step, protect my job. I couldn't afford to lose the one thing I still had full control over. I sent a private message to my supervisor, Kara, using my personal email and scheduling it for 600 a.m. the next morning. Subject line, urgent personal situation confidential. In the message, I explained briefly without emotion that I was in a coercive family environment and needed to leave urgently, but that I was fully committed to my position and hoped to continue working remotely until I found stable housing. I added, "Please don't contact me at my work number. I'll be available by email or Zoom at 9:00 a.m. for a private meeting if possible." Then I created a new email address and began forwarding anything sensitive client communications, files, two-factor logins over to it, anything that couldn't be tracked from my family's Wi-Fi. I pulled out my passport, birth certificate, and financial documents and packed them into a separate laptop sleeve. That would be my go bag if anything went sideways. I could grab that one case and vanish. I moved with clinical precision, with Juniper's memory in the back of my mind. She used to watch me pack when I traveled for work. She'd perch on my suitcase like a queen refusing to be dethroned. She was probably curled up on Chloe's couch right now, safe and cared for. I envied her. At 9:00 a.m. the next morning, I walked down to the cafe 3 blocks from our house. I ordered black coffee and sat in the farthest corner booth, my laptop angled toward the window. Kara joined the call exactly on time. Her eyes widened the moment she saw my face. "Aubrey, are you okay?" I smiled tightly. "Not really, but I will be." I explained everything in about 7 minutes, edited, but clear. How I'd been misled into coming home. How they were trying to make decisions on my behalf. How they'd even contacted my landlord behind my back. I didn't cry, I didn't rant. I laid out the facts like evidence in a courtroom. Kara listened silently, then said something that made my breath catch. "This isn't just a family disagreement," she said. "It sounds like psychological entrapment. You don't need to prove anything to us. Your job is secure. What do you need from us?" I could have cried. "Instead," I whispered, "I need a remote location, somewhere they won't think to look." Kara said she would talk to HR and see if they could assign me to a client team based in another city. "Would you be open to Seattle? We have an office there with flexible hot desking, but you wouldn't have to check in. You could work from anywhere." Seattle? It sounded like rain and anonymity, a place where no one knew my history or expected me to step up. That would be perfect. Kara nodded. "I'll have paperwork sent to your new email within the hour. Get safe first. Then we'll talk next steps." With my professional lifeline secured, I called the only person in the world I fully trusted, Chloe. She picked up on the second ring. "I'm getting out," I said simply. "I need your help." She didn't even hesitate. "What do you need?" "I need a place to stay for a few nights before I relocate to Seattle. Somewhere they won't think to look. My cousin's out of town." "Her place in Denton is empty. I'll text you the key code and address. It's yours." Relief hit me so hard I had to lean forward, hand over my eyes. "I'll bring Juniper," she added. "I think she misses you." My throat closed up. "Thank you. I don't have words." "Yes, you do," she said. "You just said the most important ones. I'm getting out." I returned to the house with fresh groceries, a forced smile, and a list of errands I needed to run the next day. No one suspected a thing. Over the next 36 hours, I moved quietly. I packed 2 small duffel bags with only essentials, no heavy boxes, no suitcases that would raise alarm. I left my laptop case by the door like it always was. I stuffed sentimental items, photos, notebooks, my grandmother's necklace into a tote hidden in the back of the closet. I called my landlord directly and confirmed the truth, yes. Someone had tried to cancel my lease, but since I hadn't signed anything, the apartment was still mine. I scheduled movers to pack and store my belongings under my name only, delivery postponed until I had a verified Seattle address. I even bought a burner phone, I transferred key contacts: Kara, Chloe, HR, everyone else could wait. My real number would soon be shut off. The morning of my escape, I left early, before anyone else had woken up. I scribbled a short note and left it on the kitchen table. Had an early errand. Be back later. I wasn't coming back. I took a final look at the house, the kitchen where I learned to cook, the living room where Savannah used to sprawl across the floor with crayons and glitter, the hallway lined with photos of a girl I no longer recognized. Then I walked out and locked the door behind me. In my car, I placed the house key on the passenger seat. Goodbye, Aubrey the helper. Hello? Aubrey the survivor. When I arrived at the Denton apartment, Chloe was already there with Juniper in her arms. My cat leapt into my lap the moment I sat down. I buried my face in her fur and let the tears finally fall. "You're safe now," Chloe said, handing me a cup of tea. "And you're not alone." I nodded. But I didn't feel safe yet, because I knew my disappearance would set off alarms, and I knew exactly how far my family would go to pull me back. I stayed in Denton for 4 days. 4 days of silence from me. 4 days of missed calls for them. It didn't take long before the messages started pouring in, first voicemails, then texts. My mom's tone shifted in a matter of hours from confused to panicked to angry. "Aubrey, where are you? We're worried sick. Sweetheart, this isn't like you. Just call us. How dare you walk out on your family like this? Your sister is crying. Your father's blood pressure is spiking. Come home." I didn't respond to any of them. By the end of the first night, Chloe had taken my primary phone and powered it off. We stuffed it in the back of her freezer, just in case they try to ping the GPS. She said, I didn't ask how she knew that. Chloe had survived a controlling ex once. She understood escape better than most. I kept my burner phone on silent and used it only for essentials: a call with Kara, confirming the Seattle assignment and paperwork, a check-in with the moving company to redirect my boxes to a storage unit near downtown Seattle, a follow-up with my therapist, Dr. Lena Cross, whom I'd just matched with through my company's employee assistance program. In our first video session, I confessed everything: the guilt, the pressure, the ache of being needed but never really seen. Dr. Cross listened carefully, then said the words I didn't know I needed. "You were never given the option to say no. That's not family. That's exploitation dressed as love." On the 5th morning, my father escalated. He filed a missing person report. I found out from Chloe's cousin, whose police officer friend flagged it in a local group chat. My face, my name, Aubrey Fields. 33, last seen leaving her family home in Lakemont. They were trying to make me the problem. I wasn't shocked. I was furious. They knew I left voluntarily. They just couldn't control the narrative. Worse. A day later, my former landlord in Austin sent an email. "Your parents stopped by." It read, "They were asking about your forwarding address. I didn't give them anything, but I thought you should know. I needed to go further underground." That night, I booked a one-way ticket to Seattle under my middle name and Chloe's last name. The airline ID check allowed for first-middle combinations as long as it matched government ID. And I updated my profile to reflect Catherine C. I wasn't running from the law. I was running from lawful people doing unlawful things in the name of family. At the airport, I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses. Cliché. Yes, but necessary. Juniper was tucked in her carrier, quiet but alert. Her presence calmed me more than I expected. She didn't ask questions. She didn't guilt me. She simply came with me. By the time the plane touched down in Seattle, the anxiety in my chest had softened just a little. I rented a short-term apartment arranged through the agency's relocation program. It was small, generic, and beautifully bland. No childhood memories, no hidden expectations. It was freedom in the form of beige walls and monthly rates. The first week in Seattle, I didn't leave the apartment much. I worked. I cooked. I walked Juniper around the building in a carrier backpack like some eccentric cat mom. And nobody batted an eye. I slept without interruption for the first time in months. But back in Texas, the storm continued to swell. The voicemails were now full of grief theatrics. My mother posted a photo of me on Facebook with the caption, "Please pray for our daughter Aubrey. She's lost her way. We just want her to come home and get the help she needs." The implication was clear mental instability. They wanted to discredit me before I could explain myself. To cast my exit not as an act of strength, but of emotional collapse. I deactivated all my social media accounts, anything with my name, my photo, or even mutual friends. I scrubbed myself off the digital map. When Chloe sent me screenshots of family friends commenting things like, "I hope she gets the therapy she needs," or "We're praying she finds clarity," I didn't cry, I laughed, because they still didn't get it. They thought they could bend the truth until it snapped into the shape they preferred. What they didn't realize was I wasn't bendable anymore. 2 weeks in, there was a knock on my door. I froze. Then a voice from the hallway, "Seattle PD." Wellness check. My blood ran cold. I opened the door slowly, ID in hand. 2 officers stood there calm, not aggressive. "We received a report from your family that you may be in danger," one said. "Are you okay?" I nodded. "I'm fine. I'm here voluntarily. No one is holding me. I moved, that's all." They asked a few questions. I answered clearly and calmly. I gave them Dr. Raycross's contact info, showed proof of employment, and even pointed to Juniper as a character witness. She meowed on cue. Finally, one officer nodded and said, "Technically, we can't disclose your location without your permission. Would you like us to inform them you're safe, but not where you are?" "Yes," I said, "please do." And then I closed the door and locked it and cried on the floor for 10 minutes straight. That night, I called my newly hired attorney. Her name was Julia Reyes Young, sharp and fiercely empathetic. "I'm being hunted emotionally," I told her, "by people who think I owe them my life." She replied without missing a beat, "Then it's time we remind them you have rights." Within 3 days, she drafted a cease and desist letter addressed to my parents. It outlined the legal definition of harassment, the consequences of spreading misinformation about mental health, and the evidence we'd collected from Facebook posts to landlord interference to unauthorized calls to my workplace. We sent it by certified mail and email. Their response? A long-winded, sanctimonious email that ended with, "We were just trying to help you see what truly matters. We're sorry you see our love as a burden." Classic. No accountability, just shame in disguise. Julia advised me to ignore it, and I did. For once in my life, I didn't respond to the bait. Seattle slowly became home. My team adjusted my schedule to Pacific time. I found a new yoga studio, a quirky co-op grocery store, and a Saturday flea market with the best secondhand books I'd ever seen. I kept therapy twice a week. I also adopted a second cat, Midnight, a scrappy black rescue with half a tail and an attitude problem. Juniper tolerated him, barely. I loved them both. But just when I thought it was over, when I finally exhaled, Savannah reached out. Her email was short. "Parenting is hard. I didn't understand what you were carrying until now. I think I get it. No apology. No request for reconnection. Just a crack in the armor." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Thank you for saying that. I hope you and Grace are doing well." I didn't say I forgave her, because forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something I owed anyone, not even blood. It was something I gave only when it stopped costing me. One night in December, I took a walk along the waterfront. It was freezing. I didn't care. The wind bit at my cheeks, and I welcomed it. Proof that I was alive, that I had made it out. I looked across the water at the twinkling lights and thought, this wasn't the ending. It was the middle. The beginning of a life where I didn't have to prove my worth through sacrifice, where I didn't have to be needed to be valued, where I didn't have to apologize for choosing me. And in that moment, for the first time since I was a child, I felt truly, irrevocably free. The storm had passed, but its debris was everywhere. Even though my parents had gone quiet after the cease and desist letter, their presence lingered like smoke on fabric faint, but inescapable. I'd catch myself jumping whenever my phone buzzed, half expecting another guilt-laced voicemail or a knock at the door with too many questions. But none came. The silence at first felt suspicious, then it felt like peace. Seattle began to feel less like a safe house and more like a life, not the one I'd planned, maybe, but one I was building on my terms. I found a permanent apartment in Capitol Hill, nothing fancy, but warm, filled with morning light, hardwood floors, and enough space for both Juniper and Midnight to claim their own windowsills. I decorated slowly, with intention. Each item I brought in was something I loved, not something inherited, gifted out of obligation or designed to meet someone else's expectations. There were no family portraits, just black and white city prints, pages of poetry framed beside my desk, and a quirky watercolor I picked up from a local art market of a cat riding a bicycle. It made me smile every time I walked by. I learned to love solitude again, not the isolation I'd felt in my childhood, but the chosen quiet that came with being whole in my own company. I cooked elaborate meals for no one but myself. I sat on the balcony with a mug of tea and read novels I never had time for before. I walked to the farmer's market on Sundays and lingered by flower stalls, buying whatever color caught my eye. For once, my choices weren't filtered through the question, what would my family think work flourished too? Once I was no longer being emotionally drained at home, my creativity returned in full force. I redesigned an entire client interface in a weekend, an idea that had been simmering for months but had been buried beneath the noise. My boss called it brilliantly intuitive. I received a company award a few weeks later. Instead of telling anyone in my family, I told Chloe. She sent me a DoorDash gift card with the message, "Order dinner. Celebrate like someone who knows what she's worth." I did. Steak, truffle fries, and a bottle of Pinot Noir. I ate barefoot on my couch, surrounded by cats, music, and silence. And I felt rich. Then, one morning in February, an envelope arrived. It was handwritten. The name on the return address was Savannah Fields. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a short letter, written in uneven cursive. Her handwriting had always been kind of messy. "Aubrey, I'm not good at letters or apologies, but I wanted to try. Being a mom is harder than I thought. Grace is beautiful, exhausting, and needy in ways I didn't understand until I was in it. I see now how much we leaned on you, how much I leaned on you. I don't know if I'll ever fully deserve forgiveness, but I do want you to know this. I get it now. I'm sorry. There was no manipulation, no request for anything, just words, simple, honest. I didn't cry, but I felt it, a soft ache, like pressing a bruise that had finally begun to heal. I didn't write back right away. Instead, I brought the letter to therapy. Dr. Cross read it silently, then looked at me. "How does it feel to read that strange?" I admitted, like part of me still wants to believe she's baiting me, but another part wants to believe her. "And what does your part want to do?" I paused. "To keep the door cracked open. Not wide. Just open enough." So that's what I did. I sent her a short reply. "Thank you for your words. I'm glad Grace has you. I hope you're finding your way, Aubrey." Nothing more. No invitation to reconnect. Just a signal that I'd heard her and that I was okay keeping the conversation slow, on my terms. Weeks passed. Spring arrived in Seattle in burst cherry blossoms along sidewalks, warm sun that surprised you before dipping behind clouds again. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic UX workshops for women re-entering the workforce. The room was filled with survivors of financial abuse, domestic violence, emotional entrapment, women who knew what it felt like to be erased, then rebuilt. I didn't tell them my story, but I think they knew. One of them, Maria, a single mom in her 40s, stayed after class one day. "You talk like someone who's been through fire," she said quietly. "I have," I replied, "but I made it out." She smiled. "You don't look burned." "No," I said, surprised by the truth of it. "I don't." Then came the email that surprised me most. From my mother. The subject line an update, if you want it. I stared at it for a solid minute before opening it. It was different. No passive aggression, no pity, just news. "Your father's recovering well from his surgery. Savannah's back working part-time at the dental office. Grace is walking. We're not sure what kind of relationship we'll have in the future. But if someday you want to talk, I'd like to listen." There was no attachment, no manipulation, just a paragraph, a choice. I didn't reply. Not yet. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to choose between total silence and total surrender. I could hold space in the middle. I could keep my peace, and still leave a light on. One evening, I had Chloe and a few new friends from work over for dinner. We cooked, drank, laughed too loud. At one point, Chloe raised her glass and said, "To the woman who vanished and found herself." Everyone clinked glasses. And I looked around and realized something I hadn't even noticed. I was no longer surviving. I was living, not just in a new city, not just in a new apartment, but in a new version of myself, one that didn't need permission, didn't require praise, and didn't beg for belonging. And this version, she wasn't going back. A year after I disappeared from my parents' house, I found myself standing on a rocky shoreline just outside Seattle, watching the tide roll in and out. It was a chilly April morning. Mist hung in the air. I had a thermos of coffee in one hand and Juniper's leash looped gently around the other. She didn't love the outdoors, but she liked me enough to tolerate it. I breathed in the ocean air and thought, this is mine. Not the coastline, of course, but the stillness, the freedom, the life. It belonged to me now, not because anyone gave it to me, but because I finally took it back. In the months following my mother's email, our communication remained distant but civil. She sent occasional updates, Grace's first words, Dad's new medication, Savannah's attempts to cook. I read them. Sometimes I replied with a line or two. Often I didn't. And yet, something had shifted. They no longer tried to guilt me. They no longer demanded more. The silence between messages wasn't passive-aggressive, it was respectful. Or maybe resigned. I didn't know which, and I didn't care to ask. I didn't forgive them in some grand dramatic moment. It came like spring thaw, slow, subtle, and mostly for me, not for them. Forgiveness, I learned, didn't mean reopening the door. It meant closing it without hate. I continued therapy, not because I was in crisis, but because I wanted to understand myself beyond the trauma. Dr. Cross helped me separate who I was because of my family and who I was in spite of them. I used to think I was selfless. I told her one day. She smiled gently. You were trained to be selfless. That's different. I nodded. So what am I now self-defining? She said. Which is far more powerful. And I believed her. Because for the first time in my life, I had dreams that didn't revolve around being needed. That summer, I took a solo trip down the Pacific Coast Highway. Just me, a rented car, a pile of audiobooks, and zero expectations. I stopped in towns I'd never heard of, ate at diners where nobody knew my name, slept in cozy Airbnbs where I curled up with midnight while Juniper side-eyed us from a suitcase. At one coastal stop, I met a woman named Leah, mid-30s. Funny, smart. She was traveling for work and staying at the same guest house. We had breakfast on the porch, and she asked where I was from. I paused and said, "Here. For now." It felt good to say. True. We talked for hours, exchanged numbers. Nothing happened immediately, no fairy tale love story, but that night I journaled a single sentence: "I'm open." Not just to her, to life. To everything I had postponed while being the responsible one. The family glue, the unpaid labor, I was done postponing. One afternoon in late August, I received a small package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photo. It showed Savannah holding Grace, now a toddler with chubby arms and wide hazel eyes. The child was laughing, mid-giggle, in a blur of motion. On the back of the photo was a note, written in block letters. "I told her about you, that you chose yourself, and that it was brave." I read it 3 times, then placed it on my desk beside a framed print that read, "Needed, valued." And I whispered, "Thank you." Fall arrived in golden waves. I hosted a Friendsgiving with Chloe and my Seattle Circle potluck style. Mismatched chairs, homemade stuffing. Someone burned the sweet potatoes, but no one cared. We went around the table and shared what we were thankful for. When it was my turn, I said I'm thankful for second chances. Not the ones given to me, but the ones I gave myself. No one clapped. They just smiled. Because they knew. Sometimes I still think about the girl I used to be. The one who stayed quiet so her sister wouldn't cry. The one who cooked dinner after homework, folded laundry for 4 people, and never asked to be thanked. The one who mistook obedience for love. I mourn her, but I don't miss her. She was necessary, but she isn't me anymore. A year and a half after I left, I stood at the edge of the same shoreline where this part of the journey began. This time, I wasn't alone. Leah stood beside me, hands in her pockets, wind whipping her hair. Juniper had claimed her months ago, and Midnight, ever the skeptic, now tolerated her presence with begrudging affection. We were talking about moving in together. Slowly, thoughtfully, on my terms. And this time, I wasn't afraid. Because I had rebuilt something sacred within me. A life not built on sacrifice, but on sovereignty. A home not given, but chosen. If you're reading this because you see pieces of your own life in mine, I want you to know something. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to walk away. You're allowed to rewrite the story. Even if others keep reading from the old script. Boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that lock from the inside. And when you finally close them to what no longer serves you, you'll find, on the other side, a world you didn't know you were allowed to enter. It's quiet at first. Then it becomes everything.